Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from Taiwan. I am Aadil Brar. Donald Trump is now officially the President of the United States. His foreign policies in the first terms escalated a trade war with China and left many Asia-Pacific allies guessing about US commitment to the region. Now with a new cabinet sworn in, Trump has promised to impose additional tariffs on China, as well as his early comments about Taiwan have left many guessing about his foreign policy towards Taipei. And now to discuss US-China relations and how President Trump's second term will take its foreign policy towards Taiwan, we are joined by Rorry Daniels. She is the Managing Director at Asia Society's Policy Institute, as well as a Senior Fellow at the Institute's Center for China Analysis. Welcome to the show, Rorry.
It's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let's first zoom in on China's response to all of this. How is Beijing responding to President Trump's second presidency, and what are some of the early views that China has expressed towards President Trump?
I think China sees the Trump presidency as one marker or milestone in a deteriorating relationship. But it's not specific to President Trump or to this moment in time. It's actually a relationship that's been deteriorating for about a decade or more. So, from China's perspective, and maybe particularly from the elite Chinese political types like Xi Jinping's perspective, the United States really is out to contain China's economic rise. They see the world through an ideological lens that says that as the West declines in relative terms, in relative power, and the East rises, the West will use all tools of power at its disposal to make sure that China cannot emerge as a true strategic peer and competitor. So I think China is looking at this election in a much broader sweep of US-China relations and their place as a rising power in history.
Do you think Beijing is concerned about President Trump's unpredictability?
China is thinking about the tactical moves that it might have to make to protect itself in the short term. So Donald Trump has always been very transparent about his policy ideas and motivations. China knows that there is going to be a lot of pressure on US-China trade, particularly the bilateral trade deficit, which is something that President Trump has talked about for a long time as a marker of health in the relationship. He sees the deficit as the sign of an unhealthy relationship. But also on high technology, which is really where both sides are putting all of their eggs in kind of one economic competitiveness basket. So China is preparing in the short term by thinking about its tools of leverage. You can see that China has already started kind of walling off its economy from the US, particularly in the high tech sector, in part because of moves that the Biden administration have made to restrict sales of high technology to China and to stop working with China's companies that are trying to develop that technology. But also in part to accelerate the production of that technology inside China so that China can be more self-sufficient and therefore a little bit more protected from this pressure campaign that it sees from the West to contain its economic rise. So those are the two kind of big, broad things that I think China is thinking about when it looks at President Trump coming in.
In your view, do you think President Trump will take a more confrontational approach as compared to the mix of competition and cooperation that we saw under President Biden? Is that the kind of approach President Trump will go for?
I don't think it can be categorized that simply. I think there is the capacity inside the Trump administration to pursue some version of competition mixed with confrontation and mixed with limited, albeit cooperation. That's not going to be the public narrative about what the US is doing on China. But in reality, President Trump and the Trump administration officials, some of them can be quite pragmatic on some of these issues. On the other hand, I think that it remains really unclear what kind of role some of the people who have been appointed by Trump in key positions will play on China policy. So he has hired people like Senator Marco Rubio, who is one of the US's most prominent and outspoken China hawks. his national security advisor as well, Senator Walsh, is someone who has said that the US and China are locked in a long term strategic competition. So there's certainly the appetite to be tough on China that's bipartisan in the United States. Again, it is an attitude that President Biden also took. But also, I think that there is some room for pragmatic cooperation. It's not going to look the same, it's not going to be in the same channels. I doubt we see a kind of a regular channel set up perhaps between Wang Yi and Senator Walsh. That's probably not going to happen. But it doesn't mean that there isn't some room for moderating the relationship on the margins to avoid all out conflict and war. He does not want to go to war with any other major power. And he wants America and American power, particularly American military power, to be used relatively sparingly.
During his first term, President Trump imposed nearly 25% tariffs on Chinese goods, and now he has repeatedly said that he will impose additional tariffs on China. How do you think Beijing will respond to these additional tariffs in the second term?
I think China will be doing what it's already doing, which is on the one hand to try to internationalize transactions in the RMB to try to diversify trade routes so that some of its products can be brought to market in other places, including emerging markets. And they know that there's some pressure on President Trump while he wants to pursue this very tariff heavy trade agenda to control inflation in the United States. So, as tariffs on Chinese products come on board, the likelihood that consumer prices rise will be high. And so, there will be a period at which those two tensions kind of come together, and that might create leverage on both sides for China, who's having, a country that is having some economic struggles right now, particularly in their domestic economy, and for the United States, who might also be facing some domestic economic pain from the strategy to come to the table and come up with an agreement to at least let some pressure off. I think at this point, the leadership of the US and China both see their power is very fungible, meaning that they would be totally fine using the power of their markets and their goods to pursue political and security goals. In fact, no economy has probably felt this more than Taiwan, which has been seeing China put informal and formal restrictions on trade and investment for now over a decade.
So now let's zoom out at the region and look at Taiwan. At the moment, there's a political tussle between the ruling DPP and the opposition KMT. How do you think China views that political tussle in Taiwan, and how do you think that will inform Beijing's strategy when Trump is in power?
I think China sees the evolving political situation in Taiwan as one that buys time for a solution to the Taiwan issue that they would like. So there was a period right after Tsai Ing-wen was elected, the PRC felt that if it could wait until the KMT was back in power, it would be able to pursue its agenda of political negotiations that it had wanted to pursue after the cross-strait agreements were signed in around 2010. I think now what they see is that opening may be coming back. By the way, I'm not suggesting that is a correct view. I don't see the current KMT leadership as particularly open to cross-strait political negotiation. But I think from China's perspective, the elite in Beijing do not actually want to take Taiwan by force. They don't want to go to war over Taiwan. They would prefer a gradual political integration that achieves the same goal, but without using force. The use of force is very risky for a Chinese leader. If one tries to take Taiwan by force and fails, that's it, game over. Maybe not just for the leader, but for the entire political legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party.
President Trump has said a few things about Taiwan's defense. He expects Taiwan to invest more in its defense. Do you think that will become a sticking point in relations between the US and Taiwan? And will he really ask Taiwan to invest more in its defense?
So this has been a long time President Trump initiative to ensure that any defense commitment that the US makes, even a soft commitment like the Taiwan Relations Act, which says that we'll provide arms to Taiwan of a defensive nature to ensure the balance of military power across the strait, that any of those commitments come with a substantial investment by that ally and partner in their own defense. So, is it a sticking point? I hope not. And I don't think so. I think Taiwan will do what it needs to do to ensure that President Trump is satisfied with its defense commitments. Another thing that Taiwan can do is to reframe this discussion. One part of this discussion is just about the balance of military power, like what arms is Taiwan buying, et cetera. Some of this conversation is about military preparedness. Is the Taiwan military up to the task of repelling a blockade, let's say, a likely scenario, repelling a blockade for a week or two until assistance can arrive from other places? But part of this is also investing in civil defense and infrastructure. So, does Taiwan have the energy stores it needs? Does it have the food stores it needs? Is it civilian preparedness ready for a blockade style situation or potentially, although I find it very unlikely, the use of force? So there are ways to frame this conversation so that Taiwan can come up with some creative solutions to contributing to defense without necessarily making the types of major commitments that would put so much fiscal pressure on other areas as to kind of destabilize the political situation in Taiwan.
Several experts have said that 2025 will be the year when China escalates tensions in the Taiwan Straits. They have said that there could be moderate tensions in the strait that could lead to wider conflict. How do you think President Trump will respond to these tensions? Will he send more support or rally the allies?
Certainly, this is an issue that is not just important to the United States. Global shipping lanes of communication go through the Taiwan Strait and around Taiwan in ways that would be extremely disruptive if Beijing were to escalate tensions to the point where there was a conflict in the Taiwan Strait. So the Koreans are worried, the Japanese are worried, the countries of Southeast Asia are concerned, Europe is concerned. It wouldn't be difficult to rally that type of international support. I'll say also that I agree with experts that 2025 is going to be a tough year for Taiwan. I do think that there is some kind of pent up frustration that Beijing feels due to the election of Lai Ching-te, who they see as an independent separatist. So I do think there's been some holding back while the US election was determined, and that holding period is going to be over. There's also a high value in Beijing for kind of testing and probing these responses from the Trump administration. What will the cabinet do is a great question. And we don't know kind of their thinking and strategy on these types of major events. So this remains to be determined, but I do agree that we're probably facing a period of volatility over the next year or so. And it's worth watching, and it's worth tracking who those appointees are, what they've said about Taiwan, and how they're responding to other crises and conflicts overseas, including what is continuing in Ukraine, as well as the kind of emerging deterioration of the Middle East.
With that, thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights with us.
Hey, thank you so much for having me here. It's been a pleasure.
This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. For more stories from TaiwanPlus News, follow us on social media. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time.
We bring you stories from Taiwan.
Every day of the week.
Our reporters travel the nation.
Exploring the issues that matter to you.
News from here in Taiwan and around the world.
What's up, Taiwan? On TaiwanPlus.
In the face of adversity, the power of truth.
A roadmap for a just and open world, charted by the freest country in Asia.
Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
TaiwanPlus News, a voice of freedom in Asia.